This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by Corporate Board Member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with Corporate Board Member, and today's show we're going to take a look at the CEO getting the board's buy-in, and we've got a great guest with us today. Let me introduce Rusty Cloutier, who's the President and CEO of MidSouth Bancorp. Rusty, welcome.
So happy to be here today.
Well, I need to let the audience know, in addition to you running a very good bank, he is also the author of a book called Big Bad Banks, which takes a look at the big banks during the crisis, and he has some views about what's happened that time, something that's a good read if you have time. Looks like pretty manageable book there. Even somebody like me could get through that.
Something that can put you to sleep at night, you know.
Well, much like this show at times. So.
I understand.
Well, Rusty, why don't, because I'm going to ask you some questions, I think it might be good for us to sort of set the stage of MidSouth Bancorp. So just take 1 minute, if you could, and just give people a summary of what MidSouth is, just so they have a feel.
Well, today MidSouth is basically a $2 billion bank. We cover all of South Louisiana, all of West Louisiana. We have basically 61 locations in Louisiana and East Texas. We in the large markets of Dallas and Houston. We cover all of those areas. We cover all of South Louisiana, with the exception of the city of New Orleans. So we're a growing institution. We started it 28 years ago as a de novo, and it built it to where it is today.
So that gives you a pretty big footprint. So talk about how the board was developed. Was it developed through acquisitions that you made where people came on? Was it people that got recruited by you or the board? Explain a little bit about your makeup.
Well, I think we have a general makeup of a couple of things. First of all, we have the people who were the organizers of the institution, have been there for 28 years. Very strong board members who had very good business experience, had been very successful in their own businesses in right. And then we've picked up a couple from acquisitions. Of course, as you do an acquisition, you pick up some strong board members. And we've recruited a number of board members. The board has done a great job. We have a board nominating committee. They work hard on recruiting people, trying to bring young people into the board, and trying to find fits that work for the board that can help them in different areas of managing the bank.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we wanted to talk about today was sort of the relationship between the CEO and the board, and particularly in your case, we wanted to talk about how you get buy-in from the board. So here you have this growth plan that's going to take you out of the state and cover areas that you think make sense. So talk to me about how you go about sort of getting them to buy into the plan, and then when the specific decisions come, how that's dealt with in the board, and how much time you give them, how you handle that situation, because the boards don't like to be surprised.
Absolutely, and I work very hard on making sure my board is not surprised. But I think first of all, you have to start with the core competence of you've all got to be on the same page, and we do that because I'm a very large owner. I'm the third largest shareholder of the company. All my board members have bought substantial amounts of stock, and we require a minimum basically to get on the board of 20,000 shares. So we want them to have an interest to be the same as the shareholders, not to have an interest in something else that says, well, making money for the bank isn't the most important job I have here today, because as you know, the board's responsibility is to represent the shareholders. And so we start off with that premise. Then we add on to that premise of every question should be, is this good for the share price? Is this good for the stock over a 3 to 5 year horizon? So let's say we're looking at a merger. The last one we did, I worked on for 7 years. They were very well aware of everything that went on. But what kind of attrition would that bring to the company? What kind of earnings will that bring? Can we increase the dividends? What will that mean to the shareholders? So I think you've got to go from that basis of all being on the same page of not having that situation. Sometimes you get a CEO who has very little ownership, and his view is maybe different from the large owners in the boardroom. The other thing is, I think you have to have great communications. I write a letter to my board every month, a president's letter, that outlines everything that's happened in the company. And I tell them that's for them to keep forever. Many of them have files of them, 10, 15 years of my letters, which outlines everything that's happening and everything that I know that's coming, every thought I've had. As many of my board members say, Rusty, I never am surprised because I knew you were thinking about this 2 months ago because you mentioned it. And so I think that's real important. The other thing that's real important, I think the CEO's got to do, is tell everybody who works for him there is no surprises in the boardroom. That, I expect to know it. My 2 chief lieutenants are expected to know everything that happens in the boardroom, and they ought to pass it on to the board. So, you don't want to walk in the boardroom and say, oh, this is the first time I've heard this.
When you were you talked about the partners that started the bank, and I'm not sure how long, if you were there that whole time.
Oh, I was from the beginning, 28 years ago.
So you had to sit down back then and sort of have a plan.
Right.
How different it was your plan from when you sat down that time to where you guys are today? Talk about the transition of that, and that had to be interesting as those opportunities popped up.
Well, I think it's very interesting because when we first started the bank, my directors would be very honest. They didn't know if I was the right person to run it. I could get approval to get a charter from the OCC. That was very important to them. But their feeling is, I don't know if Rusty's going to be the right person as this bank grows. But of course, over the years, I've made myself, I've made the shareholders, and I've made them a lot of money. So it gets to where they have a lot more trust, to where they say, well, Rusty talked us into going across the Sabine River into Texas, and that was very profitable. It's helped the stock. We've made a lot of money. So I think it's a trust factor you've got to build over a period of time. And the CEO's most important job he has is to keep trust of the board. Because if you got one board member who doesn't trust you, you've got a big problem, because that's going to lead to bigger problems down the line. And so I think it is very important for them to deal with each person, to deal with them on a one-on-one basis, spend some time with them as board members. I think the CEO, you need to spend some time with them and find out what their interest is. I've got one board member on my board who's very interested in building buildings. That's what he wants to talk about. That's what he wants to do. I have some more interested in what kind of loans we're making, or what kind of customer service we're getting. Are we sure that we're close to the communities? I have a couple that are very concerned about our community relations that we do. So I try to make sure I deal with each person's issue and address it as the best that I possibly can.
I've always said that is the unwritten skill set of the CEO, is how to guide the board without them feeling managed or guided. It's a very delicate skill set, and yet to me it's one of the most successful. You have to be successful in that to have a successful relationship.
Yeah, and you have to have a little political skills. Any CEO who tells me I have no political skills, I think he has a problem, from the standpoint that it is, trying to realize what is necessary to keep them happy. And got to remember, many of those board members are talking to shareholders. I have one board member who has a lot of shareholders, and he represents, and he came to me the other day and said, Rusty, they're asking about the dividend. When are we going to increase it? We're doing all these mergers. We're doing this, we're doing that. When are we going to return some more cash to the shareholder? And I know that's his interest. And so I was already talking to him about that early on and saying that, hopefully we can do something soon to solve that issue. So I think you've got to have a little political skills to know what the coming issues are and make sure you deal with it.
Well, that's a great segue into my last question for you, and that is, what in your mind is the secret to good CEO board relations? What would you pass along to our audience?
I think realizing that you're all there to fulfill one mission, and that is to represent the shareholders and to take care of their needs. Now, you have to realize I have a big chart in my office of all the outside situations we have to deal with, the regulators, the SEC, the rules, and whatever. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, when we started our company 28 years ago, people gave us money and they expected a return on their investment. That's what they expected. And that's our job every day. And I think if you always look through those colored glasses as a CEO or a board member, you'll have very effective relationships among the CEO and the board members because you're working towards the same goal. And we just added a new director. I'll tell you this short story. He was a NFL quarterback, Jake Delhomme, who led the Carolina Panthers to the Super Bowl. And he always makes a very simple statement that it all comes into how good the locker room is. He said, I can tell you if a team's going to win the Super Bowl if you let me sit in the locker room 5 minutes. I don't need to see them play. It's all about the locker room. The other thing we believe in very big, and one of my board members who brought it to us, his name is Joe Tatoris. He owns a food chain called Jason's Deli, great restaurant chain, is we spend a lot of time on servant leadership. Our whole job is to service our employees and to service our people. And if you practice good servant leadership from the board and management, your company will be extremely successful. It's not all about me, it's all about them. And that is something we work very, very hard on in the boardroom. And, we work trying to take care of our employees, our customers, and we know at the end of the day that'll give greater returns to our shareholder, which is our principal mission in life.
Rusty Cloutier, very great advice. I'm sure that'll be helpful to our viewers, and I want to thank you for joining us today to deal with this topic.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here as always.
And that will conclude this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and will join us next week when we'll take a look at another key topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. We'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partners, the Center for Audit Quality and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.